The envelope arrived on a quiet morning, and the moment Marcus opened it, he nearly thought it was a joke. Printed across the top was a penalty notice demanding $1 million. Not from a court, not from the IRS, not from any government agency. The bill had been issued by his neighborhood HOA because they claimed his mailbox violated community standards. Marcus actually laughed when he saw it. Then he stopped laughing. A few minutes later, he pulled an old folder from a filing cabinet, one that had been collecting dust since his grandfather's time. Inside was a document that had remained untouched for 4 decades. By the end of that week, the HOA board wasn't laughing either, and neither was Linda. Didn't expect that twist? Before we continue, make sure you're subscribed because these HOA stories only get more unbelievable from here. And while you're watching, tell me where you're from in the comments below. I always enjoy seeing how far these stories travel. Marcus had worked and saved for nearly 15 years to buy that property. He never wanted a condominium. He never wanted a cookie-cutter subdivision. He wanted land. 3 peaceful acres tucked away near a quiet valley in rural Tennessee. Sitting on that land was a small cabin that his grandfather had begun building during the 1970s. After inheriting the project, Marcus finished every remaining piece himself. No hired crews, no shortcuts. Every board, every nail, every coat of stain represented his own labor. It was exactly the kind of place people fantasize about while sitting in traffic and staring at office walls. A narrow creek wound through the trees behind the cabin. The mornings were so calm that he could hear birds long before sunrise. Some days, he could even hear frost dripping from the branches as the temperature warmed. He wasn't causing problems for anyone. He worked remotely. He kept mostly to himself. He owned 2 loyal dogs and maintained a modest vegetable garden. When he moved in during late autumn, everything felt perfect. The winter passed quietly, and for months he experienced exactly the peace he had hoped for. Then spring arrived, and with spring came an unexpected letter. The return address read Maplewood Ridge HOA. Marcus frowned. He hadn't even known an HOA existed. The previous owner never mentioned one. The realtor certainly hadn't emphasized it. Yet there it was. Inside the envelope sat a welcome packet, dozens of pages of regulations, and a lengthy list of appearance requirements that seemed designed by people who had never spent a day working outdoors. Marcus flipped through the pages, shrugged, and tossed them aside. That decision would come back to haunt him. 3 weeks later, someone knocked on his front door. The woman standing there looked to be in her mid-50s. She carried a clipboard and wore sunglasses despite standing under the covered porch. She introduced herself as Linda Marsh, president of the Maplewood Ridge HOA. Her tone made it immediately clear she wasn't there to welcome a new neighbor. "Your mailbox is the incorrect shade of green," she announced before Marcus could even greet her. He stared at her in confusion. "I'm sorry. The approved color is forest green, code 7B4, she replied. "Yours appears significantly closer to sage green. That constitutes a violation." She wrote something on her clipboard. Marcus told her politely that he would check on it. The truth was that he never gave it another thought. 2 weeks later, the HOA mailed him a fine, $250 for the mailbox, an additional $150 because his vegetable garden was visible from the roadway in what the notice described as an unapproved visual arrangement. Marcus reread that sentence several times. Apparently, growing vegetables was now a problem. Annoyed, he paid the penalty. He convinced himself that arguing wasn't worth the effort. Unfortunately, Linda interpreted patience as weakness. Over the next 4 months, the violation notices arrived one after another. His fire pit was cited. His dogs were cited for being off-leash despite remaining on his own property. A tarp covering his truck during a storm became another violation. Each new letter sounded more threatening than the last. Each fine increased, and every notice carried Linda's elaborate signature across the bottom, as though she were signing priceless artwork. Then the letter arrived that changed everything. The amount due was listed as $1 million. Marcus opened the envelope on a Tuesday morning while drinking coffee. The mug slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. According to the HOA, he now owed accumulated penalties, continuing noncompliance charges, administrative assessments, and something they called aesthetic damage compensation. The reason? The angle of his satellite dish. That was apparently worth $1 million. Instead of calling an attorney, Marcus called his father. His father listened quietly before asking 4 words that changed the entire situation. "Did you read the deed?" Marcus hadn't, beyond the paperwork required during the purchase. He had never examined the original property records. Fortunately, his grandfather never threw anything away. Deep inside an old accordion folder stored in the back of a filing cabinet, Marcus discovered a collection of forgotten documents. There was a property survey dated in 1974. There was a county easement filing, and there was one handwritten addendum that his grandfather had officially recorded decades earlier. The discovery immediately caught Marcus's attention. The Maplewood Ridge HOA had not been formed until 1989. His grandfather, however, had owned that land continuously since 1971. The moment Marcus finished reading the documents, he scheduled a meeting with a property attorney. After reviewing everything, the attorney listened carefully to the story, examined the records, and then went silent for several seconds. Finally, he chuckled. "Oh," he said, "this is going to be interesting." Most people would assume that was a point where the HOA realized it had made a mistake. After all, Marcus's attorney quickly drafted a formal legal notice explaining that the association had no valid authority over his property. The letter demanded that every violation, every penalty, and every assessment be withdrawn immediately. It seemed straightforward. But Linda Marsh had never been known for backing down. Instead of admitting the error, she escalated it. She retained legal counsel of her own, called an emergency meeting of the HOA board, and issued another letter to Marcus. This one was even more aggressive. According to Linda, decades of community activity had created what she described as implied authority over property. She argued that long-term use of the roadway established HOA control and claimed the access route had effectively become a public easement through continuous neighborhood use. Then she crossed a line that surprised even Marcus's attorney. Before the dispute could be resolved, she filed a lawsuit. The goal was simple. She wanted a court to permanently recognize HOA jurisdiction over Marcus's land. In other words, she was trying to legally secure control before he could prove they never had it in the first place. When Marcus received the paperwork, he expected his attorney to be concerned. Instead, the attorney barely reacted. "She just made this case far more expensive for herself," he said. A response was filed almost immediately. Then Marcus took a step that changed the entire balance of power. Acting on legal advice, he formally notified the HOA that access across the private roadway running through his property was now under review. He wasn't closing the road. Not yet. That would have been premature while litigation was pending. But he made one thing very clear. Future use of the roadway could not be assumed. If the HOA wished to maintain access rights moving forward, they would eventually need to negotiate a formal easement agreement and compensate him accordingly. That announcement landed like a thunderclap. The road in question wasn't just a side path. It was a primary entrance and exit for the entire Maplewood Ridge subdivision. Every homeowner relied on it. Every delivery truck used it. Every utility service crossed it. Every emergency vehicle depended on it. For the first time since this began, Linda fully understood what she had set in motion. Within days, the HOA organized an emergency community meeting. The atmosphere was nothing like the meetings Linda normally controlled. Residents who had never cared about satellite dishes, mailboxes, gardens, or HOA regulations suddenly had very strong opinions. And most of those opinions were directed at Linda. The homeowners quickly realized that without guaranteed access to that road, their neighborhood faced serious consequences. Property values could be affected. Insurance companies could raise concerns. Emergency response times could become a major issue. The entire subdivision depended on infrastructure owned by the very man they had spent months harassing. The quiet homeowner with 2 dogs, the vegetable garden, the cabin in the woods, the mailbox that was supposedly the wrong shade of green. The legal battle unraveled faster than anyone expected. Within 6 weeks, the HOA's lawsuit began falling apart. Arguments that had sounded confident during board meetings looked much weaker inside a courtroom. Linda's attorney eventually withdrew from the case. Shortly afterward, the HOA board voted to remove her as president. For the first time since Marcus had moved into the neighborhood, representatives from Maplewood Ridge contacted him without threats, fines, or demands. They came with something entirely different: an apology. Negotiations moved quickly after that. The final settlement was remarkably straightforward. Every violation was erased. Every fine was voided. The HOA agreed to cover Marcus's legal expenses using funds from its reserve account. Most importantly, the parties established a permanent paid easement for roadway access. The agreement included an annual payment that renewed automatically. Marcus suddenly found himself receiving passive income from a neighborhood he had never wanted to join in the first place. But the story didn't end there. There's one detail people in Maplewood Ridge rarely discuss openly. After the dispute became part of the public property record, Linda Marsh's home suffered a significant decline in appraised value. The reduction approached $40,000. Future buyers would inevitably discover the legal history. They would see the records. They would read about the HOA president who launched a $1 million campaign against a homeowner over a mailbox and ended up losing both the lawsuit and her position. That reputation followed the property. Meanwhile, Marcus spent the next few weeks enjoying the peace he had fought to protect. And then he did something small, something completely unnecessary, something that made him smile. A week after the settlement became official, he repainted his mailbox. Not forest green, not code 7B4, not any HOA-approved color. He painted it bright red, because the property belonged to him. It always had. And sometimes a dispute isn't really about a mailbox. Sometimes it's about reminding people that ownership matters. It's about making sure the person carrying the clipboard never forgets who actually owns the land beneath their feet, and who owns the mailbox standing beside the road. If you made it this far, you already know exactly why people love these stories. Make sure you're subscribed, because the next HOA Revenge story is even more unbelievable than this one.